Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Saul. I'm an associate with REMI, and thank you for joining us for another one of our first 100-day series. This one will be covering Biden's transportation and infrastructure policy plans. This presentation will also be recorded, and we can send out slides in the recording link afterwards. But without further ado, I'd like to jump in. I'll also be joined by my colleague Naveen Kumar, who's an analyst with us, and he'll be doing the demo a bit later. Okay, so as I said, this is one of the other series of our 100-day series here at REMI, of the first 100 days of the Biden administration. So we'll be going over a brief overview of kind of what transportation and infrastructure policy might mean in the Biden administration, what we've seen action-wise so far in these first 100 days, talk about some possible policies that may be pursued. We'll go over a little bit of background and context for REMI's TranSight model. And then we'll go over a hypothetical, TranSight model demo of an infrastructure investment scenario. So one of the first things that is kind of important to understand is that infrastructure and kind of transportation infrastructure in general have kind of often been unique in the sense that it's kind of been a bipartisan policy priority over time and over history. So, you have these quotes from, Republican rep from Missouri, Republican governor from Idaho, and also the president-elect himself, kind of all talking about the need to continue to improve infrastructure that, it helps increase economic opportunity and competitiveness kind of across the board. So, across the aisle, bipartisan support is kind of relevant and common for infrastructure and transportation policy. So outlined during the campaign, prior to being sworn in, this was Biden's Build Back Better plan, kind of priced at generally around $2 trillion. These are just some of the specific policies that had been listed out. For example, looking to provide every American city that has 100,000 or more residents with public transportation options by the year of 2030, and other things relating to zero emissions and mitigating climate change, talking about public transit and light rail networks and bus lines, and just generally improving transportation access to people that may not have had it previously. So a lot of these would require serious negotiation with Congress, and kind of the first legislative priority seems to be the COVID relief bill. But after that, Biden has kind of signaled that infrastructure, a comprehensive piece of infrastructure legislation would be something on the docket. So, that being said, he has spoken about it consistently, both as a candidate and as president. So it's signaled to be a strong commitment on his end. So you have this quote here from the now Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. "We will break new ground in ensuring that our economy recovers and rebuilds, in rising to the climate change challenge, and in making sure transportation is an engine for equity in this country." And this quote is really included to demonstrate the consistent messaging that both Pete Buttigieg has had and then the Biden administration has had in general of what they're looking to get out of their administration's policy in the transportation space. And there's kind of these three goals that have been consistently emphasized of, the economic opportunity aspect of creating new jobs, and then, also addressing economic inequality and inequity in outcomes, and then also using the transportation space as a way of addressing and then mitigating climate change effects. So, like I said, one can begin to see how some of these campaign promises start to align with these goals, generally speaking, and the messaging on these three main goals and objectives has been very consistent throughout. So as stated, Joe Biden has signaled both in the past and the present that comprehensive infrastructure legislation is a major objective of his administration. So there are several recent events that have kind of that have happened that do underscore this point. So on February 17th, just recently, a few weeks ago, he met with labor leaders in the Oval Office to discuss, the near-term priority of COVID relief, as I mentioned earlier, but also started to, delve into some of the details of his plans for infrastructure improvement. This kind of related to emphasizing infrastructure and infrastructure's role in boosting the economic competitiveness of the U.S. and its ability to create jobs, and also increasing clean energy development. And then, also just a few days ago, the U.S. Senate Environment and Public Works Committee held a hearing titled "Building Back Better: Investing in Transportation While Addressing Climate Change, Improving Equity, and Fostering Economic Growth and Innovation." And again, if you're paying attention, those are those kind of three same goals that have been consistently messaged as well. The chairman of this committee and hearing was Tom Carper, Senator of Delaware, and he started highlighting some of the shortcomings of the current state of transportation infrastructure conditions in the country. And then, he also spoke specifically about this in the context of climate change and the need to update infrastructure, to not only be more safe, but also be more resilient in the long term. And then also, somewhat recently, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and a variety of over 230 different labor and trade groups signed on to a letter that was sent to the Biden administration that emphasized the need and urged for comprehensive infrastructure legislation. At the behest of the administration, they gave a tentative July 4th deadline, which is coming up pretty quickly, but it kind of signals the support from the business community, but also labor, that there is agreement that some type of comprehensive infrastructure legislation, there's support behind it. So now to start talking about maybe some transportation policy possibilities that are worth paying attention to. This is obviously not an all-inclusive list, but one of which is kind of thinking about transportation's role in reducing emissions, and then relating to that, helping mitigate climate change effects. So, as mayor of South Bend, the now Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg had a $25 million project called Smart Streets that converted South Bend's one-way roads into two-way streets, and with bike lanes and sidewalks to encourage foot traffic and non-vehicle transportation, and try to get people into downtown to also encourage commercial activity. It's the obvious linkage of transportation's role in economic competitiveness. Both the Biden administration has Build Back Better plan, and also Pete Buttigieg, through his past experience, was kind of thinking about active transportation planning and ways to encourage people, both through bikes and pedestrian walking and things like that, to get people around from point A to point B also. So also something to kind of note is that both Pete Buttigieg and now President Biden have outlined are providing Americans living in urban areas with access to zero emissions public transportation, but also ensuring that that's still high quality public transportation. So this could mean a few different things depending on the context. This may mean new installation in cities that did not already have some kind of existing infrastructure to support this, or updating it to make it clean, or probably likely some combination of both. And then also, one of the specific concrete policies that both, again, the Biden administration and Pete Buttigieg have outlined was trying to achieve this goal of creating 500,000 electrical vehicle charging stations. And this was obviously as part of the goal to reduce emissions that contribute to climate change. So as of 2018, if you look at where emissions are being created in the economy, you can see that transportation and the electric power generation sectors are accounting for over half of all emissions in the US. And then also emissions over time tell an interesting story, because demand for both electricity and for transportation have been increasing over time. And as the economy continues to grow and there's more and more people commuting and there's more jobs, which requires more power, you start to see the overlap, the negative overlap there. So new vehicles over time have been more and more fuel efficient, thanks in part to federal regulations. But again, this increased consumption of transportation and also transit struggles have caused transportation-related emissions to increase as of late. So the question kind of becomes, how do we combat emissions in the transportation sector? It's a big component, as I just mentioned, of overall emissions. And one of the ways we might be able to think about doing this is by supporting electrical vehicle adoption, which ideally have a lower emissions profile. We've seen adoption grow on its own, over time. as operating costs continue to get lower, and then also charging infrastructure becomes more and more accessible. But this is still a relatively speaking infant industry, but one that President Biden and the Secretary of Transportation have made clear that they want to focus and invest efforts in. So it doesn't have the same amount of infrastructure as conventional vehicles and the same economies of scale. So if President Biden, Pete Buttigieg, or other elected officials kind of digging into this issue want to make it become more adopted more quickly, there may need to be ways thinking about giving the industry a nudge and ensuring it has the infrastructure in place to grow and be competitive. And also just to know, each gallon of gasoline emits a lot of CO2, which is more than EVs. So the environmental benefit is also there, and even if someone doesn't care about the environmental impacts, that they will care about how much it costs. And EVs, as you see in the graph here to the right, do have lower operating costs. So this point, coupled with the growth in EV production in the EV market and an administration that has clearly stated consistently that this is a focus of theirs, kind of makes it clear that this is a policy issue to be aware of as it as it continues to develop and take place, because there will be significant economic impacts with it. And another important kind of policy topic area in the context of transportation to pay attention to is transportation financing. So one of the main things to note here is the Highway Trust Fund, and that has, as many of you may know, it has more money going out than it has coming in, and its spending has exceeded its own revenue since 2008. And kind of to avoid delaying payments to local and state governments, Congress has had to authorize transfers to that fund on several occasions now. As a candidate on the presidential candidacy trail, Pete Buttigieg was one of the only candidates to outright support the idea of kind of developing a more sustainable and predictable means of delivering that funding. This is pegged to that gas tax, and this has not increased since 1993, and it's never been pegged to inflation. So despite the gas tax providing a linkage between highway use and the cost of building and maintaining highways, as well as costs related to fuel consumption, like pollution, it doesn't distinguish between the different levels of wear and tear that different vehicles cause on the roads for the same amount of fuel. But raising the gas tax would also have significant economic implications, which are really important to consider, especially on certain populations like middle and lower income populations, as well as rural populations. So we also just spoke about vehicle electrification, but as you all know, non-electrical vehicles are still the vast majority. So for the Highway Trust Fund, it takes a gas tax. What does that mean as more and more vehicles go electric? And one of the ideas that Pete Buttigieg has floated as a candidate was kind of shifting to a vehicle miles travel tax, where drivers are taxed by the number of miles that they drive. This may have the potential to act as a clear and more accurate link between the cost of driving on highways. However, there are a lot of questions about the status of the technology related to this. And even if the technology is ready to go, there would be a lot of questions and concerns about privacy as well. So why is this all important economically speaking? The Highway Trust Fund, as many of you well aware, funds all the road construction and other service transportation projects. So there's often projects which help near term because of the shovel-ready construction jobs, and also long term because of all the significant economic impacts that improvements in infrastructure and network improvements have. But if there are projects that can't be funded because the Highway Trust Fund does not bring enough to provide that funding, then those are missed opportunities to have positive economic impacts, which is obviously especially critical in the present economic conditions we find ourselves in due to COVID-19. It's critical to eliminate the backlog of cost-effective highway and bridge repair work and modernizing projects to rebuild the aging infrastructure system, so we can help improve mobility for people and goods where needed. And then just to lastly note here, there have been a lot of drops in ridership and revenue, because of COVID-19. At the federal level, but also the state DOT level as well. And in many recent months, states have increased gas taxes in response to that abrupt revenue shortfall, and that's revenue that's typically used for road maintenance and repairs. So due to things like working from home and socially distancing and other effects from the pandemic, people have been driving a lot less, and gas demand has fallen. So there's a consideration of how increases in the gas tax will affect drivers, many of which are already facing kind of negative economic conditions at the moment. So it's necessary to fund repairs and maintain transportation infrastructure. But many states, like my home state of New Jersey, for example, had increases triggered automatically due to existing policies. For example, like New Jersey's Transportation Trust Fund. So long story short, this kind of all serves as a reminder to think about ways to make transportation agencies and transportation policy more financially resilient. There's no crystal clear answer on reforming this, but it's clear that it's an issue that needs to be examined, and both the presidential administration and the Secretary of Transportation have made it clear that this is something kind of on their purview. So as I was just talking about with the near-term impacts of COVID-19 on drops in ridership and revenue, transit agencies have kind of seen some of the most significant impacts from this. So as the ridership drops, they've seen the consequential drops in revenues, and the financial situations for many of these transit agencies has been dire. Services still need to be provided for those kind of using the transit agencies, often for essential workers, and those do not have any other options for transportation. And transit agencies are going to be critical for the economic recoveries for many metropolitan regions. So the amount that working from home will remain a standard remains to be unseen, but everyone that has not stopped using transit cannot start driving to work after some of the work from home ends. So there's also some potential problems for serious congestion. So transit, again, is going to be a critical part to regional economic recovery. That being said, the American Public Transit Association said, recently the inclusion of $20 billion in the proposed COVID relief fund, the $1.9 trillion stimulus, in addition to the $14 billion that the industry received in the last stimulus bill, is actually $2 billion more than the agency was looking for. So this really signals strong support from this current administration for transit agencies, and will hopefully allow agencies to kind of hold off from massive cuts, but also so that they are ready to hit the ground running and provide optimal service as things start to return to normal and be a way for many of these regional economies to start to recover. In Biden's infrastructure plan, Build Back Better, one line that kind of sticks out is sparking the second great railroad revolution, and his nominee for this, is now confirmed Secretary of Transportation, seems to kind of share the same support. So many areas, often rural areas, have kind of lost rail service in recent years and could benefit from the restoration of services, especially where long distance driving or lack of regular air service are issues and kind of limit the ability for people to move around. And it can also expose somewhat otherwise isolated areas to tourism and other ways to boost their economy. Modernizing and updating the rail systems to have them operate more efficiently is a main goal, and also one with big economic implications by cutting down on commuting costs and reducing congestion, and also the environmental benefits of making rail and transit more environmentally friendly and reducing emissions. However, as these ideas for investing in transit and rail are discussed, it's critical to analyze the economic merit of them. So what are the long-term economic and demographic impacts? Thinking about how they may impact, access to labor, access to commodities, what are the economic impacts of things like changing emissions or safety improvements, et cetera. In the near term, thinking about the struggles that transit is facing, and also their role in the regional economic recoveries, and then also long term to make sure that there are positive effects for the long-term health of the national and regional economies that transit agencies help be competitive. So just to briefly give some background about REMI now before we jump into the demos. REMI was really founded kind of on this idea of being able to test policies in an evidence-based, unbiased fashion before they're implemented. So we're really the industry standard and national leader in looking at dynamic modeling for local, state, and national policies. So There's many different ways that our clients use our models to perform economic and demographic analysis. And we're kind of backed by a really strong team of both research, economists, software developers. All of our associates and analysts are all dedicated to the continued development of the model and innovation of the model. The whole, kind of the 30,000-foot view of REMI's mission is really helping trying to answer the what-if questions about the economic and demographic impacts of policy. Specifically in the transportation space, REMI TranSight users really rely on the TranSight model to look at things like tip and step planning, general economic impact analysis, project evaluation and prioritization, transportation financing, as I was mentioning earlier, and a lot of long-range and strategic planning. And this is kind of the background and base of the REMI model and the REMI model structure. REMI is unique in the sense that it's kind of made up of 4 different modeling components. You have a general equilibrium component, so we're accounting for changing economic conditions and demographic conditions over time. We can model all the way out to the year of 2060. We have an input-output model, so we're looking at all the inter-industry relationships that play out in the economy. We also have an econometric component, so we have many equations that are all peer-reviewed that are meant to link the different variables of the economy and show all the downstream effects. And then we also have an economic geography component, which is specifically useful when analyzing transportation policy, so looking at things like labor access, commodity access. And what makes REMI unique is the fact that we blend those 4 different approaches together into a very integrated and comprehensive approach to modeling economic and demographic issues. So more specifically about TranSight, the mission behind TranSight is really trying to evaluate the total economic effects of transportation policy. So this is trying to help our users to understand how transportation networks increase economic competitiveness and how transportation networks are kind of the locomotive behind economic competitiveness as well. So this is based in over 20 years of modeling experience to evaluate things like the impacts of infrastructure changes like highway improvements, port and airport expansions, multimodal transit implementations, things like bridge reconstructions as well. Kind of here are some more concrete real life examples of ways that REMI TranSight has been applied. As you can see here, we've done things like airports with Chicago O'Hare, done a lot of long range strategic planning, as I mentioned, such as with the Michigan Department of Transportation. We've done a lot of employment and demographic analysis with a lot of our MPO clients, such as Southern California Association of Governments, as well as specific project evaluation and prioritization as well. So as I was mentioning earlier, REMI takes a unique approach to modeling economic and demographic impacts of issues. And as I was saying, REMI is a dynamic model, and this is important, especially in the context of evaluating transportation and infrastructure policy to kind of see the long-term benefits and impacts of a project. So when you look at something statically, you will get that initial picture of the construction jobs and operation maintenance spending, and that is critical to understand. But when you look at things dynamically, as is capable in the REMI model, you do get that picture of the construction operation maintenance impacts, but you also see the longer-term impacts of things like how emission savings and population changes or access to labor and then commodities and getting final goods and services around network speed improvements, vehicle operating costs, how all these things are changing over time and what that means for the economy over time. So you get a full comprehensive picture of a project. And kind of the way that this works is REMI is able to integrate with any major travel demand model, and we take kind of the project specific data, and then we take the TDM input. So this is things like vehicle miles traveled, vehicle hours traveled, trip counts, and then we see how those are changing those variables that I mentioned earlier, things like fuel demand or time savings, operating costs, safety, emissions. And then that goes into the REMI model, and we get to see what that means economically and demographically over the long run. So now I'll start to kind of pivot to what we'll be demoing today, and this is just a little background on kind of the context of the demo. So Chicago is the nation's rail hub for both freight and people. 25 or almost a quarter of the nation's rail freight passes through Chicago, and that's roughly $1 trillion of freight annually. But it does suffer from congestion and kind of risks losing its hub status from the bottleneck effects. So kind of what came out of this to address this issue is the Chicago Region Environmental and Transportation Efficiency Program, or CREATE as a shorter acronym. This was established as a federal, state, private partnership to address this issue. Some specific goals, are kind of increasing capacity and efficiency to reduce travel times for both freight and passenger trains. Eliminating or reducing railroad crossing delays for both, motorists, trains, and also emergency vehicles, but also benefiting the local communities in which CREATE projects are kind of located. So again, long story short, it's really to try to keep Chicago's hub status and keep it economically competitive in the context of being a rail hub. So now I will now turn it over to my colleague Naveen Kumar to open up the REMI model and show how we would look at a scenario similar to the CREATE program in the REMI TranSight model.
Hey guys, I'm Naveen. I'm one of the analysts here at REMI, and today I'll be going through our TranSight model. And as Ryan mentioned, I'll be giving you an example of the CREATE program and how it sort of is modeled using a TranSight. So can you guys see my screen? Ryan, can you see my screen?
Yeah. Yep, all good.
So this is like the home page of our model, and as you can see, in the green tabs are the regional simulations, and on the blue tabs are the national simulations. So for any modeling purpose, the first step in a TranSight or any other model from REMI is to create a national simulation, which is sort of a baseline forecast for the whole of the nation and for all the regions. So the first thing you will do is create a national simulation, and on top of and once you're done creating a national simulation, you will be prompted to create a regional simulation, which is again a forecast or a baseline forecast just for the particular region of the model. Since this is a Chicago bottleneck model, which basically contains Chicago, the rest of Northeast Central, and also the rest of the nation model. So the regions can be chosen accordingly here. So I'll just be going through a brief demo of how we could sort of model the CREATE program that Ryan spoke about. So for the first thing we would do is click on View Forecast and create a new regional control. For the purpose of this demo, I've already created a regional control, since running a simulation takes quite some time. So I've already created a forecast, as I said, and I'll just be giving you a overview of how it's done. So the first step would be to click on a standard regional control and click on New Simulation button here. And once you click on the New Simulation button, you are prompted onto the screen where we have a lot of scenarios and variables and featured scenarios. So scenarios are basically what we at REMI have thought would be a set of policy variables which would fit a scenario. Like for example, if we click on more scenario, there's something called a tourism scenario. Here we talk about in this scenario we have policy variables such as tourism spending by residential people, non-residential people, and other policy variables. So basically we have sort of grouped all these policy variables and call them scenarios. So it'll be easier for the user to sort of look at the scenarios and click and then go forward with the the modeling. So for the purpose of the CREATE program, which basically speaks about improvements in rail and road networks in and around Chicago, to reduce the congestion and the bottleneck. The CREATE program basically talks about improving movement of freight and also movement of people in and around Chicago. So I'll be modeling that. So for that, what I've done is I've basically taken the policy variables which are related to something like which are basically related to like sales regarding industry sales regarding railroad and the other manufacturing, railroad manufacturing equipment and rail manufacturing equipment and other other sales which are related to like improvements of roads and public transport. So for that, you click on detailed industry variables. Basically, you click on the variable list. You search for the particular variable list in a search tab up here, and you click on that, and then click select. Okay, so after that is done, you can see a whole list of detailed industry sales variables here. There are a lot of variables. So for the purpose of this, you can click on file hierarchy too, which kind of makes it easier for the user to look at like various industries, and then you can click on you can expand on these industries and choose whatever you want. Particularly for this, after once this is done, once you choose your industry here, you click on region and then click whichever region you want. For example, you can take Chicago, click next and click on units, and this is where you take fixed national, fixed nominal, or fixed local or nominal dollars, and choose whatever the currency, I mean the units you want, and then sort of click next, and then you go to the inputs. I've already done this in freehand for the purpose of this demo, which is here. So what I've done is, as you can see down here, in the infrastructure spending tab, I have basically sort of taken $3 billion and spread it over the investment of $3 billion over 5 years, starting from 2021 and ending at 2025. So you can see the first one is basically transportation. The investment is in transportation structures of $0.3 billion for 5 years, which adds up to $1.5 billion in transportation structures and highways and street policy variable. And the other one is railroad rolling stock manufacturing, which is basically manufacturing of any component which is related to like railways. It could be the cabins, it could be the engines, anything. So I've invested another $1.5 billion over 5 years in that. Since this is an example sort of scenario, I'm just giving you sort of an example how it's done. So this is what I've invested. And if you have something and more detailed data, you can always look up the policy variables and do it accordingly. Since it's an example, so I've just done it like to just give you an idea. I've just sort of spread out the data here, and the result of this would basically be a reduction in congestion in and around Chicago. In order to model the reduction in congestion, since we do not have any TDM data, specific travel demand data, which can be inputted in TranSight model, since we don't have that, what I've done is I've tried to like model the effects by reducing the commuting costs, accessibility, and transportation costs. Basically, for Chicago, from and to Chicago, the region surrounding Chicago, and from Chicago and rest of the U.S. As you can see here, I've reduced the commuting costs from Chicago and the rest of Northeast Central by 0.5%. From 2026, which is basically the year the construction and the whole project work ends, and from that to 2060, forecast can be done till 2060. So I've reduced the commuting cost, accessibility cost, and transportation cost up until 2060. So after running the simulation, so if you were doing an actual model, you would click after inputting all your input list, you would click on forecast option and click run. And it would take a couple of minutes to run, and after that's done, you would be you would get the results. So I've already done that. So here are the results. So you can look at the transportation summary here. Here it shows an increase in employment right when the project begins, which is basically due to the construction and a lot of other investment in different areas that's happening. You know, people are attracted to that because a lot of project work is going on around the area. So there's an increase in employment of 6,000. There's an increase in employment about 6,000 to 5,000 for the first 5 years, and after that you can see the numbers suddenly bubble up, and it goes up to 50,000 for the year 2027, and it sort of decreases to $40,000 new jobs, and it sort of stays the same. It's kind of varying between 40 to 43,000. Yeah. After that, so that's the employment part, and the main reason for the increase in employment is because you can see the commodity access index, and here you can see the commodity access index is increasing once the project work is done. You can see since the effects of the project work, which was modeled due to reduction in commodity, commuting costs, transportation costs, and other costs, accessibility costs, you can see that there's an increase in commodity access index as a result of that. You can see the increase here in percentage points, and this goes up until 2060. The same thing with the labor access index. There is an increase in labor access indexes as well, and this is in all the major industries. As you can see, it is broken down into all the industries. And also an impact of that would be a reduction in production costs. You can see an increase in production costs in the beginning, because there's a lot of sudden project work which is happening. Therefore, there is an increase in production costs. And after that, once the impacts of the projects start seeping in, you can see there's a reduction in production costs too. And the next one is relative delivered price. Here you can see the relative delivered price decrease too once the effects start seeping into the system. Yeah, and they all reduce. They're all less until 2060. So what I'm trying to show here is just the basic, just what I try to show here is the impact of the CREATE program that the government was trying to do, or what was proposed. What was proposed was an investment of around $3 to $4 billion and an impact of 50,000 new jobs which will be created. And basically, in order to try to maintain Chicago as a economic hub, its status as an economic hub, and that's what I've tried to model here. And you can see how a REMI model sort of handles all these policy variables and how it's sort of done.